Hello, and welcome to How It's Done, a podcast about how real people do actual things to move their brands and their businesses forward. From the simplest of tactics to the most advanced tools and technologies, we go behind the buzzwords to understand the how. Have you ever seen or read or heard about someone or some company that did something really cool and you wondered, yeah, but how did they do it? Yeah, me too, so here we are. Are you curious? I'm about as curious as they come. So stick around, we'll be curious together, and I promise we'll learn stuff. How It's Done is brought to you by Fuoco, a marketing agency that knows when and how to ignite the spark. I'm Christy Goad, and I'll be your host.
On today's show, we have Mary Lynn Shu, who's Executive Director for JDRF Middle and East Tennessee Chapter. I'm super excited to have Mary Lynn because she is one brave individual on so many levels. But today we're going to talk about how in the world did she do it? She, along with her team and her board and a lot of support from a lot of people, just let this past Saturday, April 25th, 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic, pulled off the first virtual JDRF Promise Gala. And not only that, with great success, the chapter was able to raise $1.16 million, which I think defied everybody's expectations. So, Mary Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Mary Lynn, can you dive right in and start by maybe telling our listeners what is JDRF Promise Gala and what challenge, what decision were you faced with in the wake of this COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on your largest fundraiser of the year? Well, maybe not the largest fundraiser of the year. Walk might be a little larger, but a big deal.
Yeah, it actually is our largest fundraiser of the year. So the JDRF Promise Gala raises money to find a cure for type 1 diabetes. So just a little background, JDRF, formerly known as the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, we are laser focused on creating a world without type 1 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes is the less common but more severe form of the disease that is an autoimmune disease and often strikes during childhood. So this is our biggest fundraising event for the year, and this was our 20th anniversary for the event as well. So we were on track to really have a huge year, a huge celebration of these 20 years of progress. And of course, when the pandemic hit, we knew that we were not going to be able to hold our event as we had planned, which would have been, at the Omni downtown with close to 1,000 people joining us. And so we started thinking about, what would it look like to reimagine this as a virtual event? And I think when all was said and done, it worked. But only because so many people were willing to come along on this sort of crazy ride. And so I'm just so pleased with how it all turned out.
So what went through your own mind and heart as you were like, okay, am I really going to do this and ask these people to go on this crazy ride with me?
Yeah. So I think, I felt like we had two options. Well, I guess we had three options. One option would be to just cancel and take the year off. That was never really an option. People living with type 1 diabetes know that diabetes never takes a day off. And so that unstoppable character is very much a part of who we are organizationally and all of our staff and volunteers. So that was never really an option. So then really our two options were to postpone or to reimagine. And as we looked at what it would look like to postpone, we realized a couple of things. One, we still didn't know what the future looked like. I mean, we still don't today, right? And we are not an organization that has an endowment or just all of these reserves or things like that. Our core of who we are is that we are funding research as quickly as possible, which means, if we don't have revenue coming in, we can't be funding those advancements. And so that was really the biggest driver in deciding we're going to reimagine and we're going to try to bring the community together and keep moving our mission forward.
That's awesome. And can you walk us through, you have a relationship with the national organization, and it's my understanding that the JDRF Middle Tennessee chapter was the first to try this. And so did you have support at the national level? And were a lot of eyes on you for this? And how is that sort of playing out on a national scale and with other chapters as they're looking to figure out their way in fundraising for this very important mission during this time?
Yeah, it's been so heartwarming just in these couple of days since the event, hearing from chapters all across the country, because everyone really is in this same boat where they're also trying to reimagine and pivot. And so we were the first chapter within the organization to do the virtual gala with this kind of live stream component. And so there were a lot of eyes on us. I mean, that probably had me feeling more nervous than anything else on Saturday night, knowing that people from all over the organization were tuning in and wanting to learn from this. And so that has really happened. We had such amazing support from our national office. I think at the very beginning, it took a little bit of, we were just willing, right? We were willing to be the crazy ones to go first, and they were willing to go there with us. But, in the very first days of the conversation, no one was really sure if this was the right way to do this. And so I'm just so pleased that it worked out and that we trusted our gut. I think as a board with our event leadership, we talked about, what are the things that we can recreate. We can't recreate everything about the experience of being in person, certainly. But what are the things that we can recreate? How can we still share those stories of hope and inspiration? How can we still create some of that connectivity between people tuning in? And how can we give people the opportunity to support this mission that means so much? So we were able to still do those things. It looked different, but I think, some of the messages I've heard from people really all across the country just saying, even sort of fundraising results aside, just the experience of tuning in and being a part of that event on Saturday night, how that was truly uplifting for people in a time where they needed their spirits uplifted.
That's a great point. I know as a board member, that was one of our conversations early on, and you threw the idea out there to the board, and the board, to a person, I remember on that call, was like, yeah, we think that people do want something to look forward to, and everybody's quarantined in their homes. And so this is something that people could look forward to. And while initially it's like, oh gosh, should we do this? Is this the right time to ask people for money? And I think, I walked away from that initial call feeling like, yeah, it is the right time because we can do this and we really don't have anything to lose, to be honest.
Right.
Right. And yet, and we are all in this together. And I think everybody, looking forward to have something to do on a Saturday night and actually be entertained by some pretty amazing artists. Was exciting. And, everybody that I've talked to that tuned in, they did feel that way. It's like, oh, this is cool. And you might even have people out there that, I'm curious, let's get to this point in the conversation too. Like, would you work something like this into future live events, even, in-person events? But
right. I know it's so interesting to think about, what are the things from this experience that we will keep with us, even as we go back to in-person events. And I do think the ability to have people tune in remotely is something we're going to want to incorporate, because we had people from over 35 states tuned in with us. And a lot of our biggest bidders even were people that were not in Nashville. And so we definitely need to figure out how to widen our audience, even when we're back in a physical ballroom.
Yeah, because I think the numbers are you had 500 Facebook Live viewers at any given time, and then another 1,500 attendees via Zoom. Those were people that were initially going to be in the live audience at the physical gala. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the people that joined us on Zoom included people that would have been with us in the room, and then some additional folks that were able to come now that geography and scheduling were no longer obstacles. Exactly.
Wow. So let's back up and walk us through, once the decision was made and you're bought in, we're doing this, how did you go about bringing this to life? Obviously taking a whole evening and jamming it into an hour's worth of programming. And as someone who participated in this, obviously you had Bart Miller and Mercy Me, and you had Amy Grant, and you had Raylan, and you had so many different components. On the viewer side, it was seamless. It went off without a hitch. And talk to us about how you actually did that.
Yeah. So we felt like, of course, we wanted to highlight Nashville and all of its talent. And we felt like having those sort of mini concert experiences on the front and the back end of the program would be a nice way to really anchor the program, draw people in, and keep them there through to the end. And it was just so much fun having really, Eric Pasley did a lot of that reaching out to his friends in the industry, and it was so much fun having all of that talent on display, and those folks performing with us that night was so cool. You know, in terms of figuring out, okay, we're doing this, now how do we do it? You know, a first step was really putting together a run of show, you know, a real outline of what we thought we wanted that hour or so to look like. We really felt like an hour was about the right amount of time. You know, a gala, an in-person gala would unfold over the course of 4.5 hours or more. And so that was challenging, thinking about how do we bring that all into an hour and keep it really tight. And then really the other big piece was the mechanics of how do we do this? And, you know, I had just installed Zoom for the very first time, you know, that week, like so many other people.
You are kidding me. Really?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we knew nothing. But it was interesting in that first week of quarantine, I had dialed in to a couple of other webinars, just industry stuff and people talking about, you know, how do we function, nonprofits in this space and all that. And so I was sort of unconsciously realizing just by attending these other webinars, like sort of what was possible. And so I felt like, okay, I know this is possible to have some of this kind of seamless produced look, even though it's live. And then I just had to figure out how to do it. And, you know, the real turning point in that was a conversation with a wonderful supporter of JDRF. She was a member of our steering committee this year. And so I had called her to update her on our pivot to virtual. And when I called to check in with her, she let me know that both she and her husband had COVID-19, that she had recovered and that her husband was on the road to recovery, and that their son, who lived in New York, was going to be coming home. And of course, I was shocked to learn about that for them. So grateful that they are now okay. And really, it was in that conversation that she said, well, Price, you know, who's headed home from New York, who is a producer, he might be able to help. And boy, did he ever help. I mean, he is truly our hero in all of this. And so we couldn't have done this without him. And he was in the same boat we were. He was learning as he went. Like he had never done this before either. He obviously, as a producer, had a high aptitude for doing it, but he was just willing, like the rest of us, to kind of roll up the sleeves and figure it out. And he was able to figure out what software made the most sense and to create really that seamless experience that our guests got to enjoy on Saturday.
That is amazing. When Bart Miller and Mercy Me performed, for example, or when Bart was keynoting, and then his son Sam, who's type 1, which is why Bart Miller is even involved in JDRF, Sam gave this great performance. Which pieces of those were actual live versus pre-recorded?
Yeah. So it was kind of a 50-50 split. So the keynote was pre-recorded, the concert, all the musical performances were pre-recorded, and even some of the group like reactions to things were pre-recorded. And then the people that were speaking throughout the program, Stacey Case, our wonderful host, Jeff Randall, our auctioneer, of course, John Robinson joining us as a guest auctioneer in that moment. And then Charlie, our board president, and myself, we were all speaking in real time that night. So it was a little bit of both. And our goal was to have the recorded pieces, feel like they could be happening live. And that provided us a little bit of really coverage on the production side of things to be able to, switch who needed to be on screen or that kind of thing while the videos were playing.
So all the people you've mentioned, I'm curious, did you guys do a dry run of this a few times? Because you're right. I mean, Jeff and Stacey were amazing. You and Charlie were amazing. John Robinson, Titan's GM, was awesome, and it was so fun for him to do his little auctioneering thing. But did you guys do a walkthrough on this? And was it once? Was it twice? Was it several times? How did that all happen behind the scenes?
Yeah, so we did a run through without our speakers, but just kind of like using our staff as, pretending to be John or pretending to be Stacey. So we did that every day that week. We did a run through every day that week. And then the Thursday before, we did a run through with our speakers on the line. So for the production side of things, we had several run throughs and practices of hitting the cues. But then for our speakers joining us live, they had really just had one practice round. So they nailed it. They were awesome.
Wow, they really did. They're true professionals. So on the auction piece, was that a nail biter? Because you couldn't really know necessarily, no matter how much you practiced, how the live auction might go.
Right. Yeah, that was a nail biter.
And also Fundacura, let's throw that in there too.
Right. Yeah, it was all a nail biter. We didn't know what to expect compared to last year in terms of bidding, in general. And certainly we had certain categories within the auction that didn't perform quite as well as they would have normally, like some of our experiences or things, tied to specific dates. Even some of the travel probably went for a little bit less than it did last year, but it still was really successful. And then like our wine and spirits category did even better than it had the year before.
That makes sense.
People are in the mood to drink, right? So that was fun to see. The thing that was different for us is that normally we would open our silent auction up for bidding just the day before the event. And so in this environment, we actually opened it up the Monday before. So we had a lot more runway for people to bid. And so that had us feeling pretty good. We actually, the night before the gala, were ahead in our total bid amount of where we were the Friday before last year. But what we didn't know is, could we expect the spike that we see when people show up to the event and are seeing the items and bidding on them? So we were so pleased that we did have that spike after all. So, but it was a real nail biter. And then same thing for Fundacura. So our Fundacura auction is where we give people the opportunity to bid and give directly to support JDRF's mission. And so much of that experience in the ballroom is this group moment. You've heard someone share their inspiring story. This year we got to hear from Bart and Sam, and then you have this, swell of just emotion and joy as people are raising their bid cards in the ballroom to impact JDRF's mission. And so I just didn't know what we could expect. Like, would people feel caught up in that moment sitting at home, not seeing bid cards going up in the air? And so we were just blown away by how generous people were. Our board in particular, we challenged the board to consider giving more this year than they had the year before. And of course, not everyone was in a position to do that, but we had over 15 board members increase their gifts year over year and just lead by example. And I just couldn't be more grateful to you, Christy, and the rest of the board for leading in that way. And people gave. I mean, they gave and they gave all different amounts, and it all added up to just an incredible amount of money for JDRF.
Again, you're at $1.16 million for the gala this year. Is that right?
Yes.
Amazing.
Right.
So in terms of, you challenging the board, talk to us a little bit. Also, we got together and came up with an idea for a challenge leading into the gala as a way to not only raise money for Fund a Cure to provide some of that momentum coming into the gala evening, but also to raise awareness that the gala was still happening and now more people could tune in. They didn't have to, buy a ticket and sit at a table inside a ballroom. There were avenues, to open this up and have this event and participation in Fund a Cure be way more accessible to people. What were some of the things that you did differently to raise awareness, to let people know this was happening, and to build that momentum in the weeks leading up to the event?
Yeah, so we were able to, because Christy, you and your team came up with this brilliant idea for us, we were able to launch this 20 by 20 social media challenge. And so this was an opportunity for us. We launched it on April 20th in honor of our 20th anniversary of this event. And we were asking people, will you take the challenge by asking 20 friends to donate $20? And this was all online. People were tagging their friends, inviting them to donate. We tried to lean on our celebrity friends like Bart Millard and Eric Caslay and others to really get the word out there. And it was so fun to see. Like you said, it was such an accessible amount and gave people the opportunity to be part of this big thing we were doing, no matter where they were. And it's been so successful. So the board offered to match what was raised by that challenge. And so far, we've raised $10,000. And what's really fun to see is it's been over 250 donations from close to 40 states and 3 different countries. So it really is people all over helping and being a part of accomplishing this big goal.
That's awesome. Having been on the back end of that and really driving, it's like, hey, let's try it, right? If we don't know how much we'll be able to raise, because we basically had about 10 days to come up with all the supporting content for the challenge and begin to even get it out there so people even knew that it existed. And then once it opened to, get people to actually donate. So I feel good about, like $10,000 in 10 days, basically. And that's, money that we wouldn't have had coming into it. But what do you think about the future opportunity? Will you as a chapter continue to look at ways to leverage social media maybe differently than you have in the past?
Absolutely. I think everything that your team helped us with really opened our eyes to how much power there is in social media. And certainly we have a presence on social media, but what you guys helped us to do in those 10 days leading up to is so far beyond what we have done historically. And it brought in so many people, even simple things like having the event as an event on Facebook and having people RSVP on there so we could be communicating with them leading up to the event. And there was so much shareability in the stuff leading up to, and obviously with this being a virtual event, I mean, we had over 100 people that signed up to bid in the auction, not just watch the event, but to actually bid, donate, or bid on an item. We had 100 people do that the night of the event. And that's purely because of that sharing. So it's really cool.
That 100 people would be people that wouldn't have been bidding otherwise?
Exactly.
Wow, that's awesome.
I know.
So what would be your key takeaways? What would you tell others that are, out there in the nonprofit world? I mean, obviously, this was a huge success and it turned out well, right? Did it exceed your expectations? But also, we're JDRF, and especially individual chapter audiences, they're not typically, they're hyper local,
Right.
compared to like the big global thing that Lady Gaga did with all the stars, that's like 120 million raised. That was insane.
Right.
How do you view the success of this and sort of the context of what JDRF Middle Tennessee was able to raise? And then what would be your advice to other nonprofits kind of in this environment and looking to do this and their own expectations for what's possible?
Yeah, I would say, one of the biggest things that allowed this success was the fact that our corporate sponsors stuck with us. So I think that is a huge component, and we were so fortunate of the, 40 corporate sponsors that had been committed prior to the crisis. All but one of them stuck with us in this, which is just incredible. And I think
that's amazing. Yeah,
I know, it's so inspiring. And I mean, all of them, but Ford in particular, as our presenting sponsor and our corporate honoree, they also offered a matching challenge during our Fund a Cure bidding night of, on top of the sponsorship they had already done. They just stepped up and inspired us all to go further. But keeping those sponsors was so key. And of course, that has everything to do with them choosing to stick with us. But I think too, we were able to share with them, here's the added visibility that you're going to receive. It's going to look different, but here's what that will look like. And we'll be sending out, kind of recaps to them post-event of here's all the places that you were visible, and to this much wider audience, really, than you would have been visible to within the walls of the ballroom. So that was huge. And then I think, obviously, the board's willingness to lean in and step up and just the all-in unstoppable spirit. I think that, obviously that's not something that you can create on a board if you don't already have it, but just my advice would be lean on your volunteer leadership, because they are what are going to make the difference in this. And I just, I'm so humbled and grateful to work with such an amazing group of leaders like you and the other board members. And that made all the difference in the world. So
that's awesome. And we really do have a very energetic and can-do attitude board. It's awesome to be a part of it. I think also we're very fortunate at our chapter to have the Robinsons involved, and they bring it to the table. I know you asked them to do a lot, and they said yes to pretty much everything you put in front of them, and including like a family carpool karaoke, which was hilarious.
Right.
But then, John Robinson is just coming off 3 days of the NFL draft, which had to have been exhausting because they had to pull that event off virtually. And I think they did a great job. The NFL did a great job on pulling that off virtually. So John's like wrapping that up, and then he hops right in to the gala.
Yeah, I know.
How important is it? How important is it to have those kinds of almost like, I guess you would call it celebrity status?
Right.
So he's celebrity, in the sports field. And then we're lucky enough to be in Nashville, Music City, USA, and have so many amazing musical celebrities and singer-songwriter talent. How important is that, not just for a virtual event like this and getting that buy-in and participation, but just in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I really think the visibility and who we were able to have join us virtually on Saturday was so impacted by those influential folks. The Robinsons are such wonderful partners. And you're right, even though he was in the midst of draft and everything else, they were doing everything they could. Jamie was texting me people on Saturday, oh, here's someone else that wants to join us tonight. They were all in, and she was so cute. She said, I feel more nervous today with this virtual gala than I did when we were hosting the event at the stadium and we were cheering it. And I thought that same way too, but they're so all in, and it's just incredible. And, to have, an article on the front page of the sports section in the Tennessean leading into this event. I mean, just all of that visibility is so valuable in ways that we can't quite even quantify.
So in terms of your expectations, I'm sure you were very nervous. I can totally see why it would be more nerve-wracking going into this kind of unknown, uncharted waters. Tell us how you feel today about the outcome of the event. Like, how did the actual outcome compare to your expectations coming into it?
So when we decided to go virtual, of course, that was one of the primary questions within the board conversation is, well, what do we think is possible? What's our goal? What's our updated goal? And we felt like if we could exceed $800,000 in this environment, that would be just a huge win to do, a little bit more than half of what we had done the year prior. Felt like it would be a big win. And then as we got closer to the event and we started building some momentum, I don't think I said it out loud to more than a couple of people, but I started to think, I think maybe we could get to $1 million. And wouldn't that be just such a huge triumph to be able to announce raising $1 million, which, we just did for the first time a couple of years ago as a chapter in an in-person environment. So I started kind of dreaming about that possibility in those last couple of days leading into the event. But then to be able to announce 1.16 that night, I just, there were a lot of happy tears. It was so far beyond what any of us expected. It was amazing. I still can't quite believe it.
Yeah.
It still feels a little bit like a dream.
Yeah, it is amazing and a huge testament to, I think, attitude, right? And like you were like, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it and let's dream big. And even allowing yourself what you've just described to think and share with a very small group that you can even exceed $1 million. I'm a big believer in you put out to the universe and the universe gives back. So I think attitude is huge. And then sponsors and partners and board, everybody that you've described, and then really leveraging, like you did, every channel available to you: website, email, social media, phone calls, volunteers, leveraging everything that you could and throwing all that at it really made a difference.
Yeah. It all added up to a huge success. And I just, I feel overwhelmed when I think about how many people just stepped in and did so much or did more even than they would do in a typical year. I mean, my staff, they were all figuring this out as we went through. We all had to try to figure out how to become Zoom experts. And there was just so much that we were trying to figure out in such a short amount of time. And so having a team of staff and volunteers just willing to say, okay, well, let's figure it out. Let's do it. We're all in.
Right.
It's just incredible.
Right. And that, when you think about it, that's really what we're doing as a society right now, figuring it out as we go in the middle of this unprecedented time. So, well, congratulations.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your leadership on this and for just continuing to beat the drum and raise money to help find a cure for type 1 diabetes. It's so important. And also for taking the time to share how you did it. I think there will be a lot of people that are really interested to understand this a little bit more. So with that in mind, before we sign off, can you tell us a couple things? Is there somewhere people could go to actually watch a recap of this, or do you have different pieces of video from the night that will be available? And if so, how can people see that? And then also just maybe some resources if people want to learn more about JDRF or the chapter, or even to get in touch with you, how they might do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So people that weren't able to join us on Saturday can actually see the whole event from start to finish on our Facebook page. This is just search for JDRF Middle Tennessee on Facebook. You'll see that under our videos. And then we also have a sizzle reel that's going to get posted this week as well, a recap, which is fun. And yes, we want people to know that the biggest driving factor in all of this is that we feel like there is so much momentum in the research that JDRF is doing, and we don't want that to slow down. And we want people to learn all about the details of the research we're doing and the resources that we have available to people who are being diagnosed with this disease, people that in this challenging time need help getting access to insulin. There's all types of things that we do to support that type 1 community. So at jdrf.org is where people can go and find us, search by zip code, and we can get connected with people through there. And I would be remiss if I didn't invite people to donate. If you are hearing this and feel inspired to be a part of this huge thing that we are doing, we would love to have you donate by going to jdrf.org/PromiseGala. So that 20 by 20 challenge is still on. Our board members are still matching those donations. So we'd love to have your support.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you, Mary Lynn, and we appreciate you sharing your story and being so open and transparent with us all. And again, we've had Mary Lynn Shue, Executive Director of JDRF Middle and East Tennessee, here with us today talking about the success of the first ever virtual JDRF Promise Gala. First, not only for the chapter, but also for the organization nationally. And doing a great job, and again, raised $1.16 million and counting last Saturday night with over 500 Facebook Live viewers and 1,500 attendees via Zoom. So well done, Mary Lynn. Thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you to your team for everything you all did to jump in and help us, in the lead up to this. We are just forever grateful to you guys for doing that. And thank you to you for all you do personally as a board member and leader on our team. It's a privilege to get to work alongside you. So thank you.
Well, that goes both ways. I'm always so impressed by you and your leadership, and it is a privilege to serve. And our team, we had so much fun doing this and are happy that we were able to make a difference. And we'd love to continue to have you as a pro bono client.
Absolutely. So yes, please.
We look forward to how we could continue to help you. So thank you very much. And thanks to all the listeners today.
Thank you guys so much.
That's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. We're looking forward to keeping great conversations coming your way as we grow this podcast. There's even more great content from our conversations on our blog. Be sure to check it out at growwithfuoco.com. That's grow with Fuoco, FUOCO.com. Stay tuned until next time, and no matter what, stay curious.